Mike Payton here. Hello, everybody. I'm here with my wonderful co-author, Lisa Gonzalez. The latest book in the Traction Library is Process with an exclamation point, How Discipline and Consistency Will Set You and Your Business Free. We're really excited to join our friend Gary Van Bootsela, CEO for Whale, for this presentation and hopefully lengthy Q&A discussion during the Process Week portion of EOS Worldwide's Strong in 6 Business Challenge.
Thank you everyone for being here. As Peyton mentioned, I'm Lisa Gonzalez, and I wanted to share that Gary and his team at Whale were fabulous in helping us as we were writing the book process. And we love tools that can help organizations just improve their process component and get stronger. So Whale is a knowledge sharing and training platform designed to help systemize your business and help you train and scale your team without the chaos. Find a place to build your central source of truth for all of your processes, your SOPs, and your best practices through Whale. This presentation, as Peyton mentioned, is followed by a Q&A. So please either capture your, write your questions in the chat as we're going along, or capture them and keep your questions ready so we can share afterwards. So enjoy the presentation. Gary?
Yeah, perfect. I'll just introduce myself as Gary because my last name is hard to pronounce if you're not from Belgium, from which I originate. For some reason, my first name just worked out perfectly, but my name is just horrible to pronounce. So Gary here, CEO and co-founder of Whale. Besides being a tech entrepreneur, I am a very proud father of 2 daughters, and just very excited to be here with Peyton and with Lisa presenting you how process affects the different stages of your business growth. We wanted to do more of an interactive presentation, so we absolutely appreciate Peyton and Lisa to be involved with this conversation. Really is what it's going to be. And so while we were super excited to have you write a book about process, I can imagine that some people were wondering, Lisa and Peyton, like, why would you ever write something around process and call it process? Like, what the thought process was behind this? I'd love to learn. So yeah, what's the story there?
But one of my favorite quotations, Gary, is you can't reason with crazy. So I'm not sure thought process is an accurate statement, but very simply, process is the number one need of entrepreneurial leadership teams running on EOS. Even after a couple of years, what I started noticing after 5 or 6 years in my practice is my clients were 80% strong in the vision, people, data, issues, and traction component, but they weren't 80% strong in the process component. And often my clients would argue with me. Well, yes, we are. Yes, we are. Well, wait a minute, guys. Are your core processes identified? Have you all agreed on the handful of core processes? And we'd have this debate going back and forth. And at the end of the conversation, inevitably, what our clients would discover is, in the pure sense of the word, 80% strong means your core processes are documented, simplified, and followed by all to get the results you want day in and day out. And that wasn't happening. And so I felt that some deeper teaching and some thinking exercises and a mindset shift would really help the EOS implementer community and the leadership teams running their companies on EOS wrap their arms around what the process component is and why it's so important to running your business purely on EOS.
That's
and even
awesome.
to add on to that, Gary, I'm sorry, I just wanted to share. You know, we found as we were writing the book, there aren't many books or any books written that have been written in a way that really simplify how you document your processes and get them followed by your team. And so we wrote the book with the intention. It's actually intended for the visionaries and founders of companies so that they can see it's really accessible and it's really their key to the freedom that they want from their business.
Well said, Lisa.
Yeah, it's funny because we had this running joke at Whale with the clients we spoke with that ironically the piece around process in the other books is the least documented part, and so boiled down to like a document processes and have followed by all. And I was like, okay, but there's a huge gap to doing the one and getting to the other. So obviously, when we learned the news that you were writing this book, we were well just super excited and we were very grateful to have had the opportunity to contribute here as well. And I found out very recently that. That this is one of the most well received books, right? That people have been waiting for this. What's been some of the feedback you guys have had since launching the book?
Yeah, so first of all, from the implementer community, the more visionary members of our implementer community often have sent emails with a couple of swear words, and then you must have written this book for me. And so that is my story as well. Process is not important to a visionary entrepreneur until it is, right? And this idea that you're going to strengthen the process component of your business often strikes us as, oh no, that's too corporate. It's going to create bureaucracy and mountains of red tape and inefficiencies, and it's going to kill the entrepreneurial spirit of my company. And so the people who have been waiting for this book to come out have already heard from Lisa and I that that's not what we intend to do with this book at all. We intend to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can have a process-oriented organization full of creativity, freedom, innovation, disruption, et cetera. And that has excited the readers. And so that's the feedback we're getting early on. And we're blessed for that feedback. I am surprised by how popular the book was. And so is our publisher. We sold out before the official launch date. And so we're ironically, we're furiously scrambling to print additional copies because we were surprised by the positive response early on.
That's great. And one of my personal favorites is actually how the book starts. It talks about the mindset that you need to get in to really get this work in your business. Is something that we see often as well, is they turn to us and they kind of hope that the technology is going to fix everything for them, which it's not. Full disclaimer, even though we build a great tool, it's not going to solve all your problems. It starts with the mindset. And Lisa, I'd love, this is one of the quotes, I think from the book. I'd love to kind of understand what the importance of that mindset is and how it influences that process part within a business.
Yeah, I love talking about this part because if you don't get your mindset right or set your head right around process, you can learn everything about the mechanics but until you get this part right, you won't be able to commit to doing the work, and then everything we're trying to teach you is done in vain. And so we found that other founders and other entrepreneurs often resist process for some of the reasons that Peyton's already alluded to. And their resistance comes down to a belief that falls in kind of one of these categories. The first one, and I can speak to each one and you guys can talk about it too, and share on it. The first one is just the belief that I'm just not process oriented. And if you're on this conversation and if you have any inclination around that, I want to put in the chat, this belief that you as an entrepreneur are just not process oriented, or if you want to, show of hands if that's ever resonated for you. We found in speaking with entrepreneurs over and over again that they just thought they weren't process oriented, and the reality is that when you founded your company or became the head of a department or anything like that, you found what worked in the business, what made a client smile, what produced the product at a more like a cost effective rate, and you just kept doing more of that stuff. And those things just show how process oriented you are. You may not have written it down, but you kept doing over and over again the things that benefited the organization, and that's exactly what being process oriented is. And so I don't know, Peyton or Gary, if your experience with that, but I wanted to kind of go through each one and see your thoughts on each of these concepts. So the first concept, I'm not process oriented. Any experience there you guys want to share?
I'll let you go first, Peyton.
Yeah, I mean, this was the root of my uh, sort of malaise about process is that, you know, I'm pretty good when I show up and wing it. And so pretty good usually gets it done for me. Now I'm also a very prideful person, so I want to be great every time. And gradually I began to understand there were certain behaviors leading me to be good when I wing it. And mostly it's preparing. I prepare like a lunatic. So winging it is a definitional problem for me. And so this is just a very personal experience that when I'm going on stage to do a talk or a webinar, if I haven't done any preparation whatsoever, I'm nervous. I tend to talk too much. I yammer on about things that people don't care about, as I may be doing now. And so what I've learned is step one in anything like this is set aside the time to prepare. That makes me naturally process oriented because I've noticed subconsciously what works and I just integrate that into the way I do things. And when we wrote the book, what we wanted to teach everybody on this call to do is quit reacting negatively when you hear the word process, because all we're trying to do is take that wisdom you've accumulated over the years and codify it so everybody else in your organization benefits from your trial and error experiences more quickly than having to figure it all out themselves as they're learning how to do their jobs.
Exactly. Yeah. As you scale, you can no longer wing it, and you need to kind of find a way to capture it. Absolutely. Gary, you.
Yeah, I think there's also this misconception, mostly by visionaries, but generally just by business owners and even integrators, that process and being process oriented means that you need to do everything by a certain set of rules, that you'll be the one documenting each and every step in each procedure and process. And I think it scares people into that mindset of, oh, but I'm just not process oriented, because they're probably also a little bit afraid of what it means if they were. So again, the book, I think really, I love how you not only conceptualize what process really means and how it assists businesses, but also how you can do it in a very low barrier kind of way. There's not that much involved to just get started and build that foundation. And I think what a lot of people will learn after reading the book and starting the process of working on process is that it is not that huge uphill battle that a lot of people envision it being. It's just this little hump that you need to get over and get started. And so, yeah, I think that's what we keep seeing. And we've been trying to evangelize what you've finally written about for a couple of years now. So again, very grateful that it's been so popular and that message is getting across.
Yeah, Gary, you're touching on something that I spoke to yesterday in the other presentation around process for Process Week for EOS. And I think we need to talk, I probably need to at least mention it here, is that when we do talk about documenting your processes, we're talking about documenting them at a high level using a 20-80 approach, we say, capturing 20% of the steps that'll get you 80% of the results. So when it comes to an entrepreneurial company, and we're talking about using checklists, high level, checklists, flowcharts, screenshots, whatever this looks like ultimately, because your company is moving so quickly, to do super detailed SOP at this point, it just doesn't make any sense because it will become outdated really quickly. And so I don't want to miss that point as we're talking about these concepts, that people understand what we're talking about. This again, it's really accessible stuff for a growing entrepreneurial company.
Absolutely.
All right.
And Lisa, I would just add to that, there are a handful of reasons why a company follows 100 approach to strengthening its process component. And we refer to that as documenting 100% of the steps to get 100% of the people on the same page and get a compliance oriented culture. And if you happen to be an ISO certified company or somebody who's subjected to process audits on a regular basis,
right,
as SOX compliance or whatever, you need a more detailed process manual. Most of my clients who are in industries like that don't use that detailed 100 process manual for what we're selling in the book. They use our approach to get their people onboarded and trained more quickly and to consistently execute the major steps in their handful of core processes. And so if you happen to be a company that needs to do it both ways, one for your auditor and one for your people, by all means, go do it. But for most of our clients, the 2080 approach is plenty forever, because it gets people to do the most important things the right and best way every time, even when you're not there to coach, mentor, and manage them. And that's what we're trying to teach.
Perfect. And that leads perfectly into the second myth and around where people have this kind of incorrect mindset. And that's the belief that process is going to take too much time, which is exactly for the reasons we're talking about. If you are going to try to document and capture 100% of every process and expect 100% compliance and 100% of the steps, then yes, it will take too much time. But using the approach we're talking about here, it really does not take as much time, especially when you have the leadership team involved and use the approach we're talking about. So that's the second mindset that we help our teams or help leaders kind of overcome, both in the book and when we work with teams as EOS implementers. And the final one is this mindset that process destroys freedom. I had, even in interviewing founders for the book, I spoke to someone who said, I didn't like being, as a founder, he's like, I didn't like being told what to do. And I assumed other people didn't until we needed to. And so, and realized that people actually want leadership. And so we found that, what is actually destroying freedom for our leaders, and this is frankly, I think why Peyton and I, even another reason why we feel so deeply about process and about this book, is what's destroying your freedom is being called on the weekends when you think you're going to take the weekend off because something's happening back at the shop or someone needs your help. Someone calling you after work hours because something else is blowing up in the office. Not having cash flows destroying your freedom. Employees leaving because they don't have the sufficient skills to do their jobs well. Great managers leaving because they don't feel effective. I mean, we just go on and on about the things that are destroying your freedom. And when the reality is, once we capture our processes and get them followed by the people on your team, that's actually what gives you freedom. So we actually like to say, process doesn't destroy freedom. Process creates freedom.
I think what we came across, and I love the conversation we had with this person. It was this woman was running 100-person, I think, digital creative agency. And we were talking about how process fits within her company. And she spoke about that a lot of people questioned why they had processes and procedures within their business, because they had these creative people that needed creative freedom. And they said, like, aren't you stifling that creativity by having these kind of processes built out? And she expressed that she felt the opposite was true, just like you said, Lisa, that having kind of this framework in which they can operate, which is, again, kind of connecting to that 2080 approach. It's not super overly detailed, and it doesn't like tell you for each step what you need to do. It just gives you kind of these guardrails, if you will, on, hey, this is the path to success. If you stick in this lane, there's this huge room for creativity, but towards that goal that we know we want to achieve. And so I really love that mindset, that creativity and creative freedom goes hand in hand with having processes. And it does give people that ease of mind of knowing, oh, there is a frame around me in which I can operate. There's enough freedom, but there is guidance at the same time.
Yeah, well said, Gary. And the example I like to give of that, and since there's a bunch of EOS devotees on this call, it makes a lot of sense in this audience, is if you're running a creative agency, my guess is your meetings aren't as efficient and productive as they could be. So the level 10 meeting discipline is a process for running a more efficient, more effective meeting that gets all your issues on a list and allows you to prioritize and resolve those issues. And so you might feel, if you've been running on EOS for a couple of years, that in your 90-minute level 10 leadership team meeting, you're doing what used to take you and your leadership team 6 or 10 or 12 hours a week in 90 minutes every week. And so imagine what you could do when you reinvest the time you used to spend on unproductive meetings with creativity, freedom, disruption, innovation, et cetera. And if you magnify that times all the core processes in your business, and you're reducing the amount of time spent on tactical execution, you're going to increase the amount of available time for creativity and innovation. And that's what Izzy Sharp referred to as systemizing the predictable to humanize the exceptional. He wants to free you up to be amazing and to do things that people haven't ever experienced before, not get you stuck in the weeds dealing with tactical issues and problems and challenges, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, perfect. I think was there anything else you wanted to share around mindset, Lisa?
I think that's everything. Yeah, I think it's a great reminder of how, once we get past, and the only like entrepreneurs can, once they get over these mindsets, they're the most passionate advocates around process because they see that it's their key to freedom. So with the same like energy they had to resist process, the founders we spoke to and entrepreneurs we spoke to were so passionate about, and they actually said so many quotes like, "I can't believe I waited this long to do process because it really is the key to success for this organization."
Great. So a question we get a lot is, aren't we too small or too big to be focusing on documenting processes? And why should I be doing that now? Shouldn't I do that later when I'm XYZ? And so we've identified these questions coming in basically throughout what we call the 3 stages of business growth. And I'm not going to like pinpoint what a starter company is in terms of revenue or number of people, but it's this business. And I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of focusing on process in each of these stages. But to kind of set the stage, a starter is typically that still small business, but you've got a handful or 2 handfuls of employees. So you've gone from solo entrepreneur to really having this small business build out. And you wonder like, okay, where does process fit as I'm still like developing the business? And so there's a couple of things we've achieved with our clients. And the first one is actually one of my favorites. It's something I've experienced myself, and I'd love to maybe get your input about this as well, Peyton and Lisa. This funny thing happens when you've been running your business kind of out of your head, and you decide at a certain point to visualize it, either with a flow chart, by writing it out, or just identifying like, how have I done this so far? And the switch from doing it from your head to actually having something in front of you to look at creates this level of clarity you often haven't achieved before. It kind of allows you to look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. And sometimes you go like, oh, wait, why have I been doing it this way?
Yeah.
Maybe this isn't great. Or sometimes you find out like, yeah, this is actually, I think, key to success to why we've been doing so well in this specific area. And so going from that abstract to that much more clearer vision of, hey, this is how my business runs, I feel is one of the biggest benefits you can have as a small business owner or someone who leads a team. But love to kind of get your thoughts around that concept.
Yeah, so it's a beautiful tee up, Gary, because as I was preparing for this conversation, the word I wrote down is from my dear friend and mentor, Don Tinney, the original integrator, Gino's business partner, and my first integrator when I was the visionary for EOS Worldwide. And when we were on a process kick at EOS Worldwide a couple of years ago, I see Lisa Hoffman on the call. She'll remember this like it was yesterday. And hopefully I won't have you running to the drugstore to ratchet up your meds, Lisa, when I recount this story. But Don used to talk in every meeting about the importance of codifying what worked. and consistently following what works. And I love that word codify. It's defined as arranging laws or rules into a systematic code. And so as a starter business, when you're just starting to figure out what works consistently and what doesn't work consistently, if you can take the time to write down or videotape yourself or draw pictures or however you do it. I use my whiteboard for a lot of this stuff. And when you've nailed what you think leads to consistently exceptional results, man, that feeling of satisfaction and discovery and awareness is just so powerful. And then in later stages of growth, once you've codified or codified what really leads to success, as new partners join the firm, as new employees are brought on board, when they think they've got a different or better way of doing it, you can go back to what you originally discovered was the secret to your success and use it to have a meaningful conversation about whether or not innovation, improvement, optimization is necessary, because sometimes it is, or just doing it the way we've always found really works well is a better approach. And so if you don't write all that stuff down and you just allow it to be internalized in your gut, what's going to happen as a founding entrepreneur is you're going to be yelling at a bunch of people about why you think something should be the way it always has been. And they're going to look at you as against progress. And so hopefully that all makes sense. But if you're a founding entrepreneur, man, is that a really important step?
Lisa?
Absolutely. And yeah, absolutely. I even think of my own example of, I'm as for my EOS practice and my process work, I have, I'm a small team here. And nonetheless, when I was hiring a person, I realized the need to start to capture all of the processes that were in my brain about how I went about my business. So even from that standpoint, it's so applicable and valuable. And once I did it, exactly what you spoke about, Gary, where it comes to, oh, why am I doing it that way? Or do I really do it that way? Or what's the best way to do it? And how do I keep it so simple so someone can step in and take over, hopefully most of this stuff. And I think this is what, and I don't know if you're going here next, Peyton, but this is what Michael Gerber's talking about when he talks about in the E-Myth, which maybe many of you have read, probably, the franchise prototype. And that's what we're talking about. Whether or not you're going to franchise your business as you want to scale, the value of having your processes captured so that you are not the only person that people have to come to for answers is invaluable.
Yeah, and Lisa, the two benefits I would add to this stage of growth are, the ability to onboard and train others.
Absolutely.
Vastly improved if you've got a couple of major concepts written down or recorded. And then the ability as you grow from 1 employee to 10 to deliver consistent experiences because you've written down a handful of core processes or made videos of the way to do things just gets much easier, takes a lot less time. You're not starting from scratch every time you hire a new employee. Yep. And I think, I certainly am guilty of that entrepreneurial gift of figuring things out on the fly and being able to deliver excellence. But then when a new person joins my team and says, what makes for a great session for a client, Peyton? If my answer is, I don't know, I just come in and I do my thing and everybody's happy, that's not a healthy training environment.
Right.
And so that's all we're trying to do is just write down a handful of things that when you have the opportunity to delegate to others pieces and parts of your core processes, you don't have to start from scratch every time.
No, and I think it connects to the number one reason why people tend to not get started with this in their company is I just don't have the time. And ironically, doing this will just free up a lot of time.
Absolutely.
Just, like you said, it will allow you to delegate. It will allow you to remove those pieces that well, you've been executing on as the solo entrepreneur, business owner. As you start out, obviously you do kind of all the things, you've got all the hats on, and as you hire people, you want to move those hats over to someone else. And so taking some of that time to write it down, be able to delegate it much better, and give you the opportunity to go and do what you do best, work on the business instead of in the business, I think is one of the best decisions you can make. And so that's true for starter, but a lot of the things that we share here is true for any stage of business growth that you're in. And it's about building that foundation as well. The sooner you do it as a small business, the sooner you have that build out, the easier it gets to keep it ingrained within your business as it evolves. And so that leads us to growth. And you've already touched on a couple of great topics, which is as you hire more and more people, and potentially you went from one person in the sales team to now 3 or 5, it's time to kind of streamline that entire getting you on boards, getting you trained part of the business. And so I hear so many people, and it kind of connects obviously also with the timing in which we are in. We had the Great Resignation. A lot of people decided upon, do I want to keep doing this? So a lot of people kept leaving jobs, and I kept hearing, I'm losing so much time ramping people up, and then they go out and I need to start all over again. And I just don't have the energy anymore. And so my case is not about have technology do all this, or have, I mean, like this obviously is why Whale was built, but it will allow you to not only streamline and do it a little bit more efficiently, but it will also allow you to put in more of your time in that personal onboarding and training. And that's what's going to make a difference. And that's one of my points, is that doing this, it's not about just ramping up people more quickly. It's also about attracting and retaining better talent over time. Because if you can demonstrate that, hey, we have invested in making sure that you getting here and us making sure that you're going to be successful in the position you were hired for, it's you're going to feel appreciated as an employee. You're going to feel like, okay, this is the employer that wants me to move forward, to make sure that I'm going to be successful. So it even starts at getting the talent, showcasing that we've got this program, we've got this journey for you to be on as you start out, is one of the biggest gains I think you can have.
Yeah, Gary, the transition from starter to growth for me is exactly that. It's less about onboarding and training people and more about developing the championship mindset within your team. Yeah. And one thing about champions, if you want to hire the best and the brightest in the world, and you want them to be happy in your organization for a long time, champions like being surrounded by other champions and plugging themselves into a framework for championships. Mm-hmm. They don't like playing for losing teams. And so at the middle stage of growth, process starts to become less around capturing your own wisdom and teaching it to other people, and more about consistent execution of championship caliber work. And it also starts becoming more about developing and maintaining a competitive advantage over your rivals, where it's not just getting stuff done the way you do it. You start looking outward at the marketplace, at the changing needs of your customers and what your competitors are doing well and not well. And you start looking for ways to simplify and automate and streamline and eliminate redundancies, and maybe even innovate and disrupt your own processes to create competitive advantage over your rivals. And that's work in the process component too. And I think that we don't really acknowledge that part of this work when we're thinking about process, if we have a negative mindset, because we think process is there to stifle competitive advantage over our rivals and make sure we've got a bunch of robots, and it's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, and I'm like inside, I'm screaming about the fact that you mentioned something, Gary. I'm like, this is so important. Whether or not people are coming back to, from remote work and back into the office, um, if you talk about a competitive advantage, process is, at the top of the list, because you want to create a culture that has, consistent results and consistent profitability and, opportunities for training and interaction. Tell me which organization someone is going to thrive in, one where there's no captured processes, or one where processes are documented and followed. And you as a leader, and this is like what makes my heart so happy. You as a leader get to know, I've told people how to do these things, and they're invested. We've trained them, we've measured them, we've managed them for success. Your success at really getting the results you want as an organization just go through the roof. And I can't think of, maybe I can if I try harder, but a better competitive advantage in having your processes documented so that you can really confront the current state of workplace, at least in remote versus coming to the office to work.
Yeah, I think I mean, in any stage of growth, you're gonna iterate, change, you're gonna improve, and having this foundation of, hey, this is what we've done so far, and then be able to say, by the way, we've discussed and found out that if we change this, we're gonna find an even better way. Having the previous state versus the new state documented makes it much easier for you to, well, effectively navigate that change throughout your teams. Because if it hadn't been documented before, it gets harder to explain, like, hey, this is the new way of doing things. So throughout basically this entire presentation, obviously we're stating why you need to do process, but there's just so many things to
Right.
to talk about. And then scale for us is when you've grown to, let's call it a medium sized to a large size business, and you're trying to, what we call, extend what you've done so far. And so you've touched on a couple of things already on this, but maybe when you're big enough or large enough or doing enough revenue, you might think about expansion opportunities like franchising. I mean, it's a great way to expand your business. And obviously there's no better way to franchise, or there's actually no way to franchise if you haven't documented your the way you want the franchisees to operate. Because besides your brand awareness, process is what you're selling to your franchisees. This is what you're gonna what's going to make you successful, and the ones that buy into your company.
Exactly.
Maybe at a certain point here, you decide that, hey, in a couple of years, I might want to sell. It will increase business valuation. I speak out of own experience. I've had the chance to sell one business previous to this one. We obviously had everything documented, and it made it for them so much more valuable because it was not founder dependent. If I were to fall out, it still had everything on how the business operates and how it operates well. And it just makes it so much easier also to integrate the business in that new organization. And after a certain level of size, it starts obviously to get harder to maintain like customer experience the same throughout all the teams. And so having that pushed down, just like you would with EOS, have it pushed down to all members of all teams, just creates this clarity and this one unity moving forward. And again, after that, you're just this big corp that, I mean, go figure it out. You're a big corp, you'll do what you do. But these three phases build upon each other. And again, the sooner, I'm repeating myself, but the sooner you do this, you're gonna have that compounding effect happening much quicker. And it will fuel that business growth probably a little bit more as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Anything else you guys want to add on to this?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing what you said and then adding one other thought. I think Gerber called it the franchise prototype. I think we call it a well-oiled machine in the book. Dan Sullivan calls it a self-managing company. When people buy businesses or invest in businesses, they invest in self-managing businesses that get great results without depending on the unique contributions of any 1, 2, or 5 members of your team. And if they wanted to buy the 1, 2, or 5 members of your team, they could do it more affordably by just hiring you away and paying you a ridiculous salary than buying your whole business. And so if you want to create something of enduring value that's dropping profit to the bottom line on a consistent basis, or having a positive impact in the world on a consistent basis, whatever your purpose is, then creating documented, simplified processes and updating them regularly so they stay current and efficient and automated and so on and so forth is really important. The one thing I think that gets missed in this conversation, though, is the role of process in a company of scale with regard to innovation, disruption, and automation. And so the example we give of leveraging process to create a completely new category of business is an undertold story in America and in the world of business right now. And we tell the story of the founders of Uber being frustrated that they couldn't get a ride back from an event and having to pay $800 to and disrupting the taxi cab industry. But another great example is music delivery to the consumer. So here's a big ass company, Apple, lots and lots of people, big corporation, dropping $60 billion in free cash flow to the bottom line every week. And the iPod was a victory of process. The iPod was founders of a company or leaders of a company saying, hey, the process for acquiring and cataloging music sucks for the consumer. Maybe we have an opportunity to improve the way that works. That's how innovation happens in a company of scale, when there are lots of creative people freed up to do that kind of thinking. And I want the people on this call to be excited about the role of process in the future of your organization in that way as well.
There was one topic that we wanted to address as well. It's potentially how process can go wrong and what the impact is. So I don't know, Lisa or Peyton, whoever wants to take this, go ahead.
I'm happy to share it. And we have some great questions coming in too, so I'll give you a truncated version if this is the story you're talking about. So the quote we share is a John Wooden quote. John Wooden is one of the winningest coaches or the winningest coaches in basketball, college basketball from UCLA. Also an amazing human, apparently. But he had a quote that, or we have a quote: if you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to do it over? And there's a story about when basketball recruits would show up at their first practice at UCLA. You know, these were kids from the top high schools in the United States at the time. They assume they're going to go out for a really hard practice, and instead, Coach Wooden would take the time to show them, like, this is how you put on your socks. And people, and to this day today, NBA, former NBA players will share, like, we would spend time talking about our socks and how you put on your shoes. And they were blown away by it at first, just unimpressed. Then they realized that if you do the little things right, that's going to lead to success, because when you didn't put your socks on correctly, people would get blisters and they would be out for practices or games. So the value of doing things right the first time really pays off to, overall, innumerable championships for the team, and hopefully the same for your organization. So that's why we are so, like, we love this quote, because it just talks about the value of, like, slowing down so you can basically go faster. The story I want to share, though, is process gone wrong. And I shared this yesterday also. I'll give you a short version, but it's just an example from my own past. Both Peyton and I have entrepreneurial backgrounds, and I grew up in an entrepreneurial family that had no process. And so I think that kind of guided my desire for process and kind of organizing a little bit of the chaos in my life. But I ended up leaving my career. I was a lawyer and joined a startup that my entrepreneurial husband had started in the residential remodel construction world. And we had opened up offices. The goal was, and he had no construction experience, just big visionary, the big idea. And so we opened up offices in Colorado and in another state, when we relocated somebody who had also that knowledge in the organization and just transferred him to another location. We ended up opening up an office across the country where someone had no experience, and we still did not have documented processes. And along the way, I single-handedly decided to capture all of the processes in the organization. And so I ended up not involving the leadership team and over detailing every single thing we did in the organization that I understood, and ended up creating basically this 500-page SOP, this huge thick notebook of processes that when I worked weekends and nights and spent a ton of energy capturing, just to make sure that all of the pain I was experiencing from, not enough revenue or not enough profit or people in the company leaving, unhappy customers, all of that pain would, I thought, go away with me just doing this on my own. And when I ultimately presented it to the leadership team, it was not well received. It just really fell flat. And I've said, I didn't get the parade in my honor that I thought I deserved at the time. But understandably today, as a more mature leader, I realized, I didn't get everyone involved in it. It was way too detailed. I even forgot about it at a point. And so the process gone wrong is when you can go a little bit too crazy. And when I share that story, whether it's speaking in events or stuff, other people have similar stories where they've tried to capture processes, but when you do it single-handedly, it has no impact. And it's too detailed, it gets outdated too quickly. So I'm a cautionary tale. That's 20 years ago. Today, I obviously am more in the camp of let's do it this way, where you can get your team involved, make it, document and simplify it in a way that other people can follow it.
It bridges perfectly to kind of what we have as the three things to potentially consider if you haven't really worked on process before within these three growth stages, if you will. And the first one is just to get started. I mean, there's no excuse. There's the timing, the whatever you're going to bring up there is no excuse. It will alleviate a lot of the pains you're feeling probably in different areas of the business if you just start with the process of documenting processes. And to Lisa's point, it does not need to be that. I think the records I've heard was a 750-page manual. So I'm guessing there's even bigger ones than that out there.
Right.
But don't go for that outcome. I mean, there's no need to. The second one, which connects perfectly to your story as well, is this is a team effort. I mean, I had this conversation just yesterday with this person who said, I'm doing all the work, I've created the binders and people join, I give them the binders and it's not working. And I'm asking him, what's the root cause of this not working, do you think? He's like, I have no clue. And I said, it's with what you started off with. Like, you've done it all. You have built it all. There's been no collaboration. There's been no buy-in from anyone as to why this matters. Don't get me started on fiscal binders, but the fact
exactly.
you do not approach this as a collaborative effort and embrace the process as a team will make it much harder to succeed. And then ultimately, again, it's about extending the value of that throughout different things, from ramping people up, training them, getting clarity across all teams, up to going into that franchise model and so on. It's all going to happen if you just take that first step. Obviously, there's a couple of things to consider, but I think most of the golden nuggets, if you will, have been shared here. I love that 20/80 approach. That's our philosophy as well. Keep it short, concise, simple, easy to understand and consume, because people facing a 200-page binder will get discouraged immediately. And it's just not the best way to get started. So I think we're about done. So the only thing I want to share, I've said this a couple of times before, the biggest challenge we keep on hearing is getting started. It's taking that first step forward. And we've designed something that will assist you with taking that first step. And it's called the 14-day process challenge. Typically, business assume that if they're gonna work on process, they will take about a year, or they define multiple rocks for different team members. It does not need to be that complicated. It does not need to take that much time. So we've packed a challenge together in 14 days to get your core processes documented, shared, and measured in just 2 weeks. And so what people can expect, and definitely check out the URL, but what people can expect when joining the challenge is just 2 weeks packed full with tips and tricks and best practices and methodologies. A lot of the stuff that you shared in your book, but how to practically approach it within your business. It's a video-based series that you can engage with as many team members as you like. And ultimately, it's about just taking small steps during 2 weeks to get you to a foundation. That's the aim, giving you that foundation that you can then further build upon. But the foundation is where it gets started. And so we just want to motivate people to join the challenge. And by the way, there's a process book in for every person joining. So just for that, it's worth the value. But check it out. If there are questions, feel free to reach out to the team at Whale. And thank you so much, Lisa and Payne, for joining me during this series. I think if you're okay, we can maybe open it up to questions. If
Absolutely.
Not,
Hey there. Yeah, this is Stephanie at EOS. I just wanted to say, when you guys were speaking in the last session, part of the session, Michaela raised her hand. So I wanted to go ahead and see if she had a direct question, and then we'll roll through all the questions that have been shared in the chat. Michaela, are you still there?
I am. I'm so sorry. That was an accidental hand gesture recognition.
Just saying hello. Hi, Michaela.
Saying hello. Thank you.
Michaela.
Hi, Michaela. Good to
Perfect.
see you.
No problem. Nice to say hello to you. So we'll go to the first question then, everyone, from John Hansen. It says, question, a barrier for our company is communicating the ethos of our company processes. What foundational philosophies are prioritized in decision-making, etc.? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so, the tool for that, in my view, is your VTO. And a quarterly state of the company message where you're talking to everybody in your organization or communicating in some way to everybody in your organization about who you are at the core with core values, what your sweet spot is with your core focus, where you're going long term, your marketing strategy, et cetera, should, in my view, be the message that your employees need to understand why we do things the way we do them for the people we consider customers or clients. And all I would say is, if you're surprised that you've delivered a great quarterly state of the company message to your people multiple times and they still don't seem to get it, especially in the context of process work, then have faith, because people need to hear you 7 times to hear you for the first time. And our job as leaders is repeating ourselves so frequently we get sick of hearing ourselves say the same thing over and over and over again. And we can't imagine people want to keep hearing it, but that's our jobs. And that's the way I'd answer that question. Lisa,
Yeah.
anything else you would add there?
I agree, and I think it also comes in the training, John. If you're sitting along someone and doing the training, or whoever's doing the training on a process, because I've heard clients say, or people with processes, well, we showed them the process at onboarding. Why aren't they doing it? And it's like that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about you pick the training that works best for your team, whether it's one-on-one training, on the job training, during a level 10 meeting, whatever it looks like. And that's also where you communicate the why. We spoke with a client that or a company that, if the goal is to serve coffee, that's great. But if your goal is to create a beautiful experience while you're delivering the coffee, that's the only the stuff that you as a leader can communicate to the team, because anyone can put a cup of coffee in front of somebody, but the why and how you do it is really important. And that, again, is where training comes in, and your core values, as Peyton mentioned.
I don't have anything to add. I think these are perfect answers.
Okay, good.
Okay, well, we'll roll on then to the next question from Kelly Pratt. It says, you mentioned that we're not creating SOPs. Can you A, explain the difference between SOP and process, and B, at what point do we flesh out the SOP?
Hi, Kelly. I can start. So when we're talking about creating processes, we're talking about documenting at a high level. So if you think about when we talk about, for example, documenting, to give you a real example, your human resources or people process, it could look something like this. And we don't want to ever be like tell you this is what it's going to look like because every organization is different. But it may look something like, job postings, interview candidate, onboard candidate, things like that. So super, manage candidate, exit, I'm sorry, manage employee, exit employee. Like those are maybe your people processes, maybe something, I'll just leave it there. That is your core process. SOPs may be also called like your procedures, all these other things under a sub-step, anything else you're doing below that is whatever you're going to call it. That's not what we're talking about here, but we just want you to get started with identifying the core processes, the high level steps. And I see teams after that absolutely do the work beneath where it gets a lot more detailed with, the exactly how and, when and where and why. But we just want to keep it very high level at first because if you're going to, and trust me, this is from experience, if you're going to dive in and tell someone how to do everything from how you flip on the computer when you sit and, walk in the door, which I'll bet almost did when onboarding a person at the receptionist desk, that stuff changes. How you do it, what software you use, all of that changes, but the process of how you run the organization, the core process, those will typically, be where you start.
Yeah, and
But
then
tell me, Peyton, if you have anything to add, and Kelly, if that answers your question too, let us know.
I just summarize what you said. I agree 100%. It's level of detail, Kelly. So an SOP is typically 100% of the steps in 100% of the processes to get 100% compliance. Okay. A core process is a handful of steps in your handful of core processes that are going to get you the biggest bang for your buck. And if you need more detail after you and your leadership team have agreed on the handful of core processes and the major steps in that process, then you go do an SOP that follows the outline created by the core process document, for lack of a better term. And the analogy I give to that is a personal wellness journey might include just 3 major steps. Write down or enter into an app everything I eat, exercise for at least 45 minutes, 5 days a week, and step on the scale once a week. All of the other stuff about the detail around that is probably in your wellness SOP, but your core process is just 3 steps.
Yeah, I think I've found, because we keep getting that question, like what's the difference between process and procedures? I found that explaining it as process is outlining what you do, and SOPs is the how you do it. It's probably the easiest way to understand it. And to point B, at what point do you flesh out your SOPs? We tend to try be data and practically driven, meaning that go and look at the sources that cause most issues. And it's kind of easy. You can check out, obviously, what's not going well. If you get complaints, like where do you get complaints from? If go to look at your emails, what are the repetitive questions you keep getting? Or even in your chats, maybe you've got like a Teams or a Slack environment, what keeps boiling up? Maybe that is something you need to build more clarity on. Or you could go as far as, this is something that we've built in, is analyze search results. If you've got like a central place where you've got your processes documented and people can search for them, we've got this insight that gives you the result of what they're not finding. And it's going to tell you, what do they need? What are they looking for? And so that's what's going to allow you to prioritize and define potentially where you need a little bit more depth as you build out that lower level.
Thanks, Gary. Our next question is from Louise Perez. Can you set a few examples of indicators to measure some processes?
I can go, or Peyton, do you have it?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Sure. So we suggest, a couple of different angles from which to measure your processes, to measure the outcomes of your processes. And I think someone else asked a similar question. In a remote company, how can you measure that all processes are followed by all? So I think measuring your processes, and this again is all part of getting your processes followed by all. We talk about the importance of training, measuring, managing, and updating. And when it comes to measuring, you can measure for one of a few things. You can measure for compliance. So if part of your process is, and the example we've used is, to wear safety goggles in the field, you can measure, are people wearing safety goggles in the field? And it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need a spreadsheet. You can use tick marks, whatever it takes. Don't let complexity get in the way of capturing this stuff. Okay. And so you measure, is someone wearing safety goggles? You can measure for frequency. I'm losing my thing. The frequency is, are people doing it frequently enough to get the results we want? So if you're in a sales organization, you have to send out 4 proposals to get 2 sales a week. Are the people sending out those 4 proposals? So you want to you measure for like these activities that are going to get you the results you want. And you can also measure for outcomes. Are we getting the results we want? So are we getting the 2 sales a week? And you track it. And the place you track it, if you're an EOS company, is your departmental scorecard, company scorecard. People can have individual measurables that they're tracking. And it's just all part of the game of business of tracking. Are we doing the things we need to do and using the processes to, at the end of the day, we're doing this to get the outcomes and results that we want. So that's some ways to do it. I hope for both Luis and Solange that answers. Scorecards are a huge key to keeping your processes alive.
Yeah, and I would say you don't have to measure those 3 things for every step in
Exactly.
every process.
Absolutely.
You should measure the things that give you the most important insight into whether your people are doing it right. That's measuring for compliancy, doing something often enough to get the desired result, or getting the desired outcome. And you should measure those things in the right place in your organization. So the last thing we want to do is create a 900 measurable leadership scorecard because the leadership team feels like it needs to look at every step and every process and have evidence that everybody's following it by all. Just measure a handful of numbers that give you insight at a high level as to whether people are doing it right, doing it often, and getting the desired result. And Gary, what you said earlier about search results telling you what people are searching for that they can't find is a great example of data that helps you make better decisions about where to focus your time and energy. So that's what we're talking about. Where should the leadership team dig in and focus time and energy, because the leading indicators they're looking at tell you that we might have a problem next month or next quarter.
I think at the same level, and it has to do with getting there, is not forgetting that just like with vision, where you need to repeat yourself a couple of times, it will take a couple of times for people to really understand like what the process looks like. So also building that as a repeatable process to re-communicate how and what you need done in specific areas of your business, and keep at it, because typically we see this pitfall of businesses communicating it once. When you hire that person, studies have shown that like you forget about 50% of what you learn in the first couple of weeks when joining a business. So set up a cadence and going through that stuff a couple of times over and over again. Maybe even build it into like your weekly meetings on, hey, let's go through this process once over, see if there's any questions. Just build it within the culture of your business as well, is I think one of the tips I would give. Don't just see it as it's this document, it is stored there, go look at it when you need to. It doesn't work like that. You
Exactly.
will need to put in some effort for people to follow it ultimately.
Exactly. So Mo, looks like you have a question. Unmute yourself.
Yes.
Hi there.
Great presentation. Thank you guys for everything. My question would be is that currently the state where I'm at is I first got stuck with identifying what the core processes are, and then went to work on the BPM concepts. Is that I'm trying to create the value chains in order to just highlight those core processes from a customer perspective. Period. It's it's the end, just starting with the end in mind. And I started identifying those core processes accordingly. However, what I'm stuck in right now is that I'm trying to create a framework for everything that we're doing, and this framework is kind of high level. I'm building the whole architecture from the top to bottom or whatever. The thing is that buy-in, um, uh, um, it's going to take time,
Yeah.
and the leadership are more interested in what's happening now, what are the results that we're going to create now. So how can I, based on this, first of all, how can I get the buy-in on this framework? And the second thing is that how can I just drill in and get those small successes, just get those small successes based on whatever big picture we have. That would be my question.
So Mo, I keep vodka in the freezer in my session room specifically for Mo. So I know you're asking for clarity, and I just recommended vodka, but there's a reason. There's a method for my madness. So a couple of things. Number one, like all visionary entrepreneurs, you want to have a complete picture to share with your team that helps them understand why you're working so hard at creating this framework, so that they quit arguing with you and they're totally bought in right away. And we all want that. But you're also probably hardwired to iterate and improve and tweak things as you go.
Definitely, yeah.
So you're fighting with your desire for flexibility, your desire for clarity, and your passion for flexibility and innovation. And so step one, quit fighting with yourself, because you're really fighting with yourself. Okay. Step two, just think about the three things you need your people in this team to do really well. It's like teaching football or soccer, if you're an American or a Canadian, to a 6-year-old. You don't teach a 6-year-old all the ins and outs of the game of football. You teach them to pass the ball with the inside of their foot and to shoot the ball with their laces. Very basic stuff. Okay.
Right.
And so what I'd urge you to do is have the small wins, because you're willing to focus on the basics now while you're formulating this big picture idea in your head. Just focus on the simple stuff and keep doing your framework work, because someday those two initiatives are going to merge into a glorious thing. And you're going to say to yourself, finally, I've got everybody doing the basics well, and we've got a whole symphony written that all the musical instrument players in my orchestra can execute on. But you're not going to get there before you launch.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think I didn't make myself clear there. Is that I was asking about how to get the buy-in from leadership, because
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
Mo, who is on your, how many people on your leadership team?
it's 6.
And then are you writing these processes on your own or with them helping?
Well, it's a long story,
You
but
can
I
confess,
wasn't
Mo. You can.
brought into the company as a process developer, but I just saw that's what the company might need, and I changed my title, and now I'm working on process development, and that's
Okay.
what we're doing now.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
our approach is so intentional, Mo, and that, we have to get the leadership team involved. If you heard my
Yes.
story, and I appreciate your role, and it's so valuable to have someone with your skills in your organization. But I think if you can get the rest of the leadership team to understand and check out the approach we talk about, which is we get the leadership team in the room, we have them identify what are our core processes. We have them decide which are the ones we're going to tackle first. Each person, may own one of those core processes depending on what their role is on the accountability chart. And you can sit alongside them and help them, because people may think they're not process oriented, or they can't do it, but
Yep.
that's how you get buy-in. But you doing it on your own you'll just keep hitting from my experience and
Mhm.
perspective, and from what our book is sharing, and you're just going to keep feeling like all this talent you have is not being, there's no benefit to it unless you get them alongside you to own some of it.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, and that's what I'm planning to do. However, where I'm stuck is this the trick between or while getting the buy-in. We have sat more than one time, and they are I mean, they know what the value of what we do. They understand the value of that, and they're in.
Yeah,
However, it's how to manage to get both, like
Yeah.
working on a small thing or a small improvement project, if I may,
Yeah.
and while doing both.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Is that possible, or should this
I
sequential
think
thing, or
I think the concern I've got listening to you, and then we've got to move on to another question,
sure,
is
sorry.
that using the BPMN framework, which is brilliant, and the nature of the work we do, I think you may be losing some of your team members in terms of complexity and a perception of rigidness.
Mm,
And so all of the stuff in the book about the psychology of people undergoing a process initiative will be really helpful to you. And I think it might help them articulate to you why they're struggling with your approach.
mm.
And so I just say the book is more a psychological book than it is a procedural book. And I
Yes,
think
yes.
you need to dig into the psychology of the resistance and really seek to understand why they're pushing back. And my suspicion is it's because of complexity and rigidness.
Mhm.
Just
Okay.
be careful there, okay?
Okay, last question.
And
May I
thanks for-
ask how
Well, we have-
different the
Go ahead.
process book from that?
I'm
So-
sorry. Say that again. I interrupted.
Your
Sorry.
your
Say that-
book, the process, yeah. And I'm willing to get it.
Yeah, so on all the major book retailers, and if you have any trouble with the book retailers, go to eosworldwide.com, the Traction Library page. You can order directly from our publisher's site through that page.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you for asking too. And we have just a couple of minutes left. Kelly, can we grabbed one of your questions. Are you good? And you can absolutely reach out to either of us. I'm Lisa.Gonzalez at EOS Worldwide, Mike Payton at EOS Worldwide, if you guys have additional questions. Thank you guys so much. Gary, you have 2 minutes, I think, or 1 minute left.
Yeah, no. I think feel free to reach out to us as well. Obviously, we're surrounding these topics. I saw one more question come in. I can very quickly maybe give one tip around ISO. And maybe not necessarily EOS as a whole, but more about process and ISO and how to leverage. So what I see happening a lot is companies do ISO, they have this great documentation, and then it kind of sits there just for auditing purpose. You've got this wealth of information already built. Go through the process of potentially filtering out some of that information that is too detail oriented and leverage that to the benefit of all the things discussed today: onboarding, training, clarity, maybe franchising, whatever it is. Both
Exactly.
go hand in hand, but just make sure you don't go into full detail mode, which you kind of need to do for auditing purposes versus what your people actually need as a guidance. So that's typically our advice. It's this wealth of information, just leverage it across the different
Exactly.
needs to be had. No, other than that, thanks again, Payton and Lisa, for helping me spread this message across. Hopefully it was helpful for others. And you can always reach us at usewhale.io as well, if you want to learn more about our solution and how we assist companies running on EOS.
Thanks so very much to Whale for sponsoring this presentation and also for sponsoring Process Week. We really appreciate it. Thanks again, Lisa, Payton, for your insight. And as we noted, we'll be sending out an email to all attendees with process tools from EOS, as well as the recording of this session, so you can go back and review all these great tidbits. But again, thank you so very much for joining, and we hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thanks.